The return of China has been one of the greatest modern miracles.
China is giving hope, encouragement.
Hello and welcome to the Hub on CGTN. I'm Huang Jiyuan in Beijing. Throughout 2025, we've witnessed significant and profound global changes. Geopolitical instability has intensified. The impact of artificial intelligence is accelerating, and the international labor markets continue to shift. At the same time, new waves of U.S. tariffs and rising protectionism are reshaping supply chains and global trade rules, and countries in the global south are increasingly joining forces to amplify their voices on the international stage. China, for its part, has been both a driver and a stabilizing force amid this turbulence, from deepening high-quality development at home to advocating for more inclusive global governance. As the world becomes more interconnected, yet more contested, China's approach to openness, growth, and multilateralism remains a major factor in reshaping regional and global outcomes. My colleague Mushahid Hussain Sayed sat down earlier with Professor Kishore Mahbubani, one of Asia's most respected thinkers, to get his take on the year's important events and developments and on what to look for in 2026. The professor, as always, has provided some thought-provoking insights into global affairs.
Welcome to China, welcome to Beijing, and welcome to the CGTN studios, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. It's a great pleasure and privilege to welcome you and to have a chat with you on these issues. Let's start with your book first. And I've been reading that book, by the way, and it's a riveting review of what an amazing life that you've had so far. And I see it something in sync, your life, the story of Singapore, the rise of Asia, as if the three of these separate but related events are synchronized. Let's hear what you have to say about your book.
First of all, thank you, Senator Mushahid, for inviting me to your program. It's a great honor to be on your program. And thank you very much for mentioning that I'm here in Beijing to launch my memoirs, Living the Asian Century, the Chinese edition on Monday. And you're absolutely right that I'm very privileged that the story of my life, which, as you know, begins with the two chapters, first two chapters.
From poverty to prosperity, if I may say so.
But the first two chapters are called, first chapter one is called Born Poor. Chapter 2 is called Still Poor. So I experienced poverty, I think, for the first 20, 25 years of my life. And that was the typical third world condition in many countries. So as a child, I had to go on a special feeding program because I was technically undernourished. I lived in a house without a flush toilet. I, witnessed gangsters fighting on the street. So it was a very typical rough third world childhood. But in the course of my life, I've seen Singapore go from having a per capita income of $500 in 1965 when it became independent to now having a per capita income of $90,000, higher than the US and the UK. So it has been an amazing journey, which I think, as you know, has been replicated in many Asian countries. And therefore, I thought I should share my life story with my friends here in Asia and in the world.
Meeting between President Xi Jinping and President Trump was very productive and which had a good outcome. You have been advising the West that the West should learn to live with a rising China. It seems that President Trump has followed your advice. So what's your take on this meeting between President Xi and President Trump?
In the case of this meeting, took place between President Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump, this was the first time that they were meeting since President Donald Trump took office a second time. And as you know, it's taking place against a larger backdrop where there is obviously a major geopolitical contest going on between the United States and China. And that's what my book, As China Won, is about. And against the backdrop of this contest, against the backdrop of the rather painful tariffs that the Trump administration has put on China and other sanctions that they have put on China, this meeting could have turned out very badly. But amazingly, it turned out very well. And I think it was a great relief, not just for United States and China. It was a great relief for the whole world that you've seen at least a temporary stabilization of the US-China relationship. Because if things go wrong between these two countries, and when they start imposing tariffs and sanctions, lots of other countries get caught in the crossfire. So when the crossfire stops, it's good for the other countries in the world and it's good for the world. And I would say both President Donald Trump and President Xi showed great statesmanship in this meeting, and they realized that the world was looking to them to come up with an agreement to have at least a temporary truce in all the measures taken against each other.
So do you foresee the future trajectory of China-US relations embarked on a constructive engagement, or perhaps it will still have that competitive edge?
The United States has clearly made a major decision that it wants to remain as the #1 power in the world. And that's what all #1 powers want to do. But China, in its efforts to remove poverty, in an effort to improve the living standards of its people, in an effort to create the largest middle class in the world, has obviously generating a very large economy that will, at one point in time, overtake the US economy. So, and throughout history, for 2,000 years, the world's #1 power will always try to push down the world's #1 emerging power. So the fact that the United States is trying to push down China is something you can expect. This is what history teaches us happens. But nonetheless, even though this contest is inevitable, you can still impose guardrails on this contest to make sure that the contest and competition continues within certain boundaries and doesn't go out of bounds. So that, I think, is what we should hope for. The contest will definitely continue, but both sides should continue talking to each other face to face as often as possible, and then hopefully ensure that this competition remains within certain limits and bounds and not disrupt the rest of the world.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
So that's good if there are certain rules of the game at the international level between the two big powers, China and the United States. I think it's good for the region, good for world peace also. You have always been a strong exponent of the Asian century, even the book is titled that. And I think your prediction seems to be coming out correct about the Asian century, the way events are moving. So how do you view the emergence, the resurgence of Asia and the Asian century? What are the contours and how do you see it developing?
Well, I can tell you that I have discovered accidentally that the world is preparing psychologically for the Asian century. Now, I say this because my 10th book was my memoirs. My 9th book was an open access book, and the title was The Asian 21st Century. Now, I asked the German publisher Springer, this is an open access book, free book, how many downloads should we expect? He said if we get 20,000 downloads, it's a very good result. But instead of there being 20,000 downloads of the book, there have been over 4.1 million downloads of the book in 160 countries. And to me, that's a signal. The reason why people were downloading the book and reading a book called The Asian 21st Century is that they realized that the 21st century is going to be the Asian century. And the data is very clear. Just to give you one example, you compare the size of the Chinese economy with the combined economy of the European Union, right? In 1980, when China started its reforms, Europe's combined economy was 10 times bigger than China. Today, they are about the same size. By 2050, Europe will be half the size of China. Can you imagine that? Europe has gone, in my lifetime, from being 10 times bigger than China to becoming half the size of China by 2050. Now, this is a major structural shift of power to Asia that is happening.
So the power structure has come back with a bang back to Asia. You talking of China's rise, some in the West are a bit skeptical and critical. They say that China's rise, although it's very peaceful, China is probably the only country which has risen in the world peacefully without any invasion or without any aggression or without any occupation or without any colonization. They say it's unfair, and maybe China tries to take advantage of the West. What's your take on that? Would you agree with that assertion?
Well, I mean, you're absolutely right when you say that the West, especially the Anglo-Saxon media, has been very skeptical of the China story. Take, for example, this famous British magazine, The Economist. It's always a great fun to read The Economist. They're very witty and very clever. But they've had covers every few years saying, oh, the Chinese economy is collapsing, China has peaked, China is stagnating, and guess what? Decade by decade, China keeps growing. And the reality is that China's return of China has been one of the greatest modern miracles that we have seen. And you're right, it's actually quite remarkable that China's rise so far has been peaceful. China has not fought any major war since 1979, 46 years ago. And you compare China's rise with other great powers, like, for example, the United States, you'll see this is quite remarkable. Remember, Graham Allison has told his fellow Americans, please, please, don't ask China to be like the United States of America, because when the United States was emerging, it declared wars on countries, it declared war on Spain, and that's how the United States came to conquer the Philippines, right? So this shows you that China's rise is unusual, because here is the emergence of a great power that hasn't fought any major war for 46 years.
You mentioned The Economist, and I think Economist is now also making amends, because last week, a few weeks ago, they had a cover story that on the trade war, they said China is winning the trade war. And recently they had another cover story. They said China, the scientific superpower. And they said the old science order dominated by the United States, Japan, and Europe is now coming to an end. So I think new realities are overtaking that. And coming to this relationship again with the US, I think there are also areas of collaboration. For example, artificial intelligence, digital economy, climate change. So would you focus on that perhaps the principal proclivity would be more on collaboration or more on some sort of competition when it comes to the US in those areas which affect not just the US and China, but the world at large?
Well, I think definitely there are many areas in which the United States and China can and should collaborate. In my book as China Won, in my concluding chapter, the main thesis of my concluding chapter is that the United States and China should look at areas where they'll benefit by mutual cooperation, and certainly climate change is one of them. But there are other areas, and I'm glad you mentioned artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence should never be put in charge of deciding when to start a nuclear war. That any decision to start a nuclear war should be made by human beings. Because as you know, if a nuclear war begins, it's not just China and the US that will be obliterated. All of humanity will be obliterated in a major nuclear war.
I think you're right, because President Trump also mentioned when he had the summit with President Xi Jinping that it's about G2 between China and the United States, which means that they have accepted that it's a multipolar world. And already his Secretary of State also mentioned that we are living in a multipolar world. So that's a good sign, a recognition of the new realities. And coming now to the China's own economy and economic development, China has unveiled the fifth, this five-year plan. And some are in the West are already critical. They say it's strategic fatigue. The Chinese economy is slowing down. How do you see China's vision for future economic development and its strategy? Because that is, of course, part of what China is doing in terms of globalization, because China is the principal fuel that is pushing globalization forward.
You're right. It's actually quite remarkable that China is still proceeding with five-year plans. Because as you know, in the Reagan-Thatcher era, the West sort of fell in love with the idea that markets know best. And they ridicule all suggestions of economic planning or five-year plans and so on and so forth. But now you can see very clearly that it was very wise of China to continue with its five-year plans. And that's why China has achieved another miracle where its share of global manufacturing in the year 2000 was only 5%. In the year 2000, 25 years ago, it was only 5%. But by 2030, China's share of global manufacturing will be 45%. Now, future historians will be amazed. How did this happen? And one reason why this happened is because the Chinese went ahead with their five-year plans and focused on developing what was important for them. And the other big decision that China made, which you referred to, was that at a time when some countries are retreating from globalization, China has decided not to retreat from globalization. And I think that's very positive for the world. I was in Davos in January 2017 when President Xi Jinping spoke, and he said that China hesitated, but in the end decided to plunge into the ocean of globalization. China struggled to swim, China drank water, but after that it became stronger. So the fact that China is persisting with globalization is, I think, a very positive development for the world, because that's what the world needs today.
And also, I remember the famous speech of President Xi Jinping in Davos in January 2017, where he said that anybody who opposes globalization is like a person in a dark room, locked up.
Yeah.
So that focus is clear. Some also are critical in the West about China's economic planning. They say that it deters vitality, innovation, although we have seen the example of DeepSeek, how they have done it in artificial intelligence. So how do you view China's own economic decision-making, and especially what do you think is the need for structural reforms in China in terms of economic development?
I think I have just flown to Beijing after spending a few days in Shenzhen and Zhuhai. And during my stay there, I also met some young people who had launched some startups. And the idea that China is not innovative is absolutely crazy. China couldn't have increased its share of global manufacturing from 5% to 45% without having incredible amount of innovation, certainly in manufacturing. And so I was, for example, when I was in Zhuhai, I went to visit probably the world's largest air conditioning factory run by a company called GREE, G-R-E-E. It's amazing. It's shocking. So it's an amazing transformation that shows how much innovation there is in China.
That's why the President Xi has also been focusing on what he calls high quality development, and that's necessary for maintaining and sustaining economic growth. And there's also this aspect of how it's not just China developing, it's as President Xi said very rightly in his speech, walking with China means walking with opportunities, and investing in China means investing in the future. So in that context, when we talk of China's planning and China's development, some people also fear there is a threat, that it's a threat to the existing order. In your view, is that concern or criticism justified? Or how do you view China's development at home being inextricably intertwined with the globalization and development abroad?
Well, I think it's good for China to go for high quality development, which is what you mentioned. Because, I mean, in my book, Has China Won, in chapter 7, I describe one reason why the United States is today a troubled society is because it has become a plutocracy. And you know, it was people like Paul Volcker, Martin Wolf, Joe Stiglitz who have described the United States as a plutocracy. And in a plutocracy, the economy grows, but the benefits only go to the top 1%, 10%, and the bottom 50% don't benefit at all from the growth and development. Now that's low quality development because the people are not benefiting. So if high quality development means that you actually share the benefits with everyone and people benefit from it, that's a very positive thing. And for China to innovate and grow its industries also means that then it can share its technology with the rest of the world too. Certainly in the global south would appreciate getting more access to Chinese technology too. So high quality development will benefit China and will benefit the global south too.
And recently, President Xi Jinping launched the Global Governance Initiative. Of course, there have been other initiatives also, but how do you see China shaping global governance through its development planning? Because that is one of the important ingredients of China's development strategy.
Well, I think it's very timely for China to launch a global governance initiative because, as you know, the world has shrunk. Effectively, as Kofi Annan said, we now live in a small global village. Now, when you live in a small global village, you need a village council. And the only global village council we have is based on the United Nations. Now, one of the most unwise things that the Western countries have been doing have been to try and undermine the family of United Nations institutions. And I know I wrote a book called The Great Convergence, in which I describe how the West had unwisely tried to undermine institutions of global governance. So for China to come along today and say, no, we actually think in a small global village, we need to work together and strengthen institutions of global governance, that's an incredibly positive initiative.
You are absolutely right. The focus on the United Nations as the centerpiece of the existing world order. But I'd also like to have your perspective on the changing world order, how the world is changing and how there is an inexorable shift in the global balance of economic and political power, slowly but surely from the west to the east. Maybe your final thoughts on that?
Well, I think the shift of global power to the east is very real. And, you know, I'll give you a simple statistic which will astonish your viewers. You know, I come from Southeast Asia, ASEAN, Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And the ASEAN, the European Union economy is 5 times bigger than ASEAN's economy. We are about 3.5 trillion, they're 17.5 trillion, right? Mm-hmm. But guess what? In the decade 2010 to 2020, ASEAN added more to global economic growth than the European Union did. In fact, the European Union is actually shrinking, sadly, you know. So therefore, this is one indication of how growth is happening, and what the rest of the world should do, therefore, is to find ways and means of engaging all the rising economic powers in this area and to work with them rather than to try and suppress the growth of Asia. And I hope that as a result of watching this program, viewers in the West will tell their governments and say, why aren't we cooperating more with Asia?
With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Many thanks to our distinguished guest, Professor Kishore Mahbubani. And viewers will probably agree that we had a scintillating discussion. And the key takeaways are very important. First, that basically we are seeing the emergence of a new global order where the existing power balance is shifting from the West to the East. Secondly, China's innovation and China's development is driving globalization.
2025 has shown us how quickly geopolitical shifts, technological waves, and international trade rules are reshaping the world order. For the Global South, this represents both challenges and potential new beginnings. As we move toward 2026, these forces will continue to intersect and evolve, and those who can grasp the trends may emerge stronger in a changing world. Thank you for watching. Our coverage continues on CGTN. Bye now, and take care.